Exploring our metaverse is kinda awesome, right? Here you can hear from folks who work on the daily to build immersive experiences like this. Get inspired for how customer experiences like these can boost your brand. Hello to Mike Sunda, co-founder at Push Japan, and who's operating at the forefront of NFTs and Web3. Get ready to learn about NFT use in Japan and the possibilities we can expect for the future.
Hi everyone, my name's Mike Sunda. I run a creative studio called Push. We're based in Tokyo. We do creative work, video production, strategy for a range of global and local brands here. And on a personal level and on a work level, also quite heavily involved in NFTs and Web3. So today I'm going to be talking about the relationship between NFTs and Japan. I'm going to talk quite broadly about the cultural context and then end with some slightly more actionable insights. So as we've seen in the NFT space, Japan-inspired projects have been incredibly popular in the sort of initial stages. So if you look at the likes of Oni Force, Azuki, Clone X, Japanese pop culture and its various sort of aspects have been really prominent throughout the space. And that's not particularly surprising if you think about how popular anime is globally, but also if you think of the specific sort of backgrounds of people involved in Web3, again, it's not unusual that they would be drawn to Neo-Tokyo inspired sort of sci-fi projects or more generally anime inspired projects. And even beyond that, if you think about the Japanese influence in street fashion, and we see a lot of that in Clone X and their partnership with Takashi Murakami and everything that they've done since launch. As NFTs sort of expand further into street fashion and also some of the more sort of street culture oriented aspects of art and music, then we're likely to see that sort of Japanese influence sort of retain. One interesting thing that I find is that aside from select projects, so Shinsei Gadaverse being a good example of a very popular, successful Japanese-owned or Japanese-created project, Takashi Murakami's own Murakami Flowers project being another example. But aside from a few select examples, Japanese-authored or Japanese-created projects haven't actually been that prominent or successful within the space. And historically, it's quite, I guess, interesting, but also not that unusual because Japanese culture, pop culture, doesn't actually travel as well as a lot of people assume. If you think about the success of a franchise like Pokemon, academics like Iwabuchi Kochi have written about this, but it's almost odorless, or he uses this term odorless to refer to its cultural sort of identification. Obviously, it comes across as foreign, but it doesn't come across as specifically Japanese per se. A lot of the elements within a franchise like Pokemon are sort of ambiguous and very, I guess, uniquely, odorless is the term that they use. And you could argue that a lot of other popular franchises to come out of Japan from Nintendo and other big entertainment companies have been similarly odorless, which allows them to perform well in such a globalized cultural space. And this is something that Galverse does especially well, I think. It retains very distinctive aspects of Japaneseness, the Sailor Moon inspiration, the anime aesthetics, but it's also somewhat ambiguous enough culturally to succeed anywhere in the world. It doesn't throw up any roadblocks in that respect. And Murakami as well, his entire career has been sort of catalyzed through the sort of super flat movement that he coined. And again, that really speaks to globalized elements of post-modernity and post-internet culture, nothing necessarily too specific to Japan, although obviously he does draw on specifically Japanese aesthetics and traits. And on the flip side, if you look at the fashion end of the NFT spectrum, Japan has long acted as a contextual vessel in which Western brands and cultural movements can take on new meanings, new value, and ultimately be catalyzed within this Japanese context. So another very sort of strong Japanese studies academic, David W. Marks, he writes about the origins of denim, American denim and Ivy League fashion in Japan, and how it was imported into Japan and took on a whole new wave of meaning and popularity here. And we see this most explicitly in the origins of streetwear, where the likes of Fujiwara Hiroshi, Fragment currently, they went to places like New York, they brought back records, they brought back inspiration from US hip hop, and they brought it into a very different, distinct Japanese context where it took on a life of its own. Excuse the motorbikes outside. And it spawned an entirely new cultural movement because of that, because it took on new forms and transformations, and the back and forth relationship between Japan and the West, or rather Japan and outside of Japan, is a very interactive one that typically produces new forms of culture rather than rehashing the same original forms. So to end, what does this mean for NFTs? One, that the odorless essence of Japaneseness clearly performs very well in this hyper-globalized space, and NFTs are very, very globalized as a space, obviously quite centered around America in terms of sales volume and things like that, but the very nature of decentralized platforms and decentralized currency attached to these projects means that it is by nature a hyper-globalized space. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how this sort of essence of Japaneseness continues to perform detached from any specific notions of authenticity or the sort of the roots in Japan itself. And then secondly, and this is more, I guess, important for people involved in building in the space, I think we're going to see a real value being attached to the Japanese audience, the consumer audience, and the creator community here. Because if you look at the historical examples, some of which I've touched upon, the additional value that can be created from a Japanese creator community or curatorial community means that they can elevate products or brands in ways that are completely unexpected and take them to new levels of popularity, but also significance, and I guess just increasing that breadth of cultural relevance around the world. And we've seen that with streetwear, and there are a lot of parallels between streetwear and NFTs, the drop culture, the exclusivity, etc. And I imagine that much in the same way as Japan was pivotal in creating the streetwear movement, it will be pivotal as a market in developing the sort of the next step of, I guess, the NFT sphere and how that evolves. And I think we see projects like CloneX already recognizing that. They have, made a point of communicating not just in English but also in Japanese, in directly engaging the Japanese audience and community through specific channels, through specific Japanese language community management. And I think it makes sense for them because they very much skew towards the street fashion end of the spectrum. So I think they recognize innately and intuitively a lot of the things that I'm talking about today. But it's not just them; it will really apply to a breadth of projects going forward. And in that respect, I think it's important that we all recognize the creativity and the inherent value that Japan as a creator community can have on IP of all origins, and I look forward to seeing how that continues to evolve in the NFT space. Thank you.